Okay. You do? That's a problem. It's there to be put on. It didn't come off. Okay, all right, Boker Tov. Okay, today's daf is Nun Gimel, and we start the beginning of a new parak. And we really are not going to look at the issues of the Mishnah. We're going to use the Mishnah as a jumping off point for a couple of pages of Agadata, so it'll be a fun few days. The Mishnah had spoken about Kesed Ma'abrim, not to be confused with Ma'arvin, Eruv, Ma'abrim, like Ibur, pregnant woman, because it talks about, basically making the lines around the city so you get extra space. You sort of, the city juts out more than it normally would because any protrusion you square off and you get extra space. So that's going to be the jumping off point of the Gemara. Let's take a look at the Gemara 3 lines from the top on the Gemara. Rav Shmuel, debate of Rav and Shmuel. Chatani Ma'abrim, one has the version of the Mishnah with an ayin, Ibur, pregnant. The Chatani Ma'avrin with an aleph. Mandashani Ma'avrin, so the one that says Ma'avrin, Aver, like you add limbs. Okay, so again, you extend it by adding limbs. Umandashani Ma'abrim, Isha Ubara, like a pregnant woman. So a difference between an aleph and an ayin. It's interesting, by the way, I should just say that there's other Gemaras that indicate that in more Greek cities in Israel, Greek Roman cities, they weren't able to distinguish between ayin and aleph, and that has really indicates lack of the guttural ability to sort of speak a Semitic and guttural language. So it is interesting here that a question of an ayin and aleph would actually be pronounced differently, and in an oral culture you would think you would tell the difference. But the Gemara elsewhere does reflect the sort of loss of guttural vowels. Yes. First Ashkenazim, exactly. Okay, so now the Gemara has other debates of Rav and Shmuel about certain interpretation. Ma'arat HaMachpelah, what does it mean by the double cave? Rav and Shmuel, Chadamar Shnei Batim Zelifnei Mizeh. Double is two houses, one inside of the other, so it's like a cave that there's an outer chamber, then an inner chamber, maybe a chamber behind it. That's doubled. Like it actually is two stories. And that's the idea of doubled because a house is normally defined by the roof in halacha, so it has two roofs. Which is what the Gemara says. If it's one on top of the other, we understand. That's the meaning of the word machpelah, that it's doubled. What does machpelah mean? Because again, it would not be considered doubled because it's only one roof. So shekfula bezugot. Really, the doubling here does not mean the chambers. So the chamber thing wasn't really relevant. It really means that it has multiple pairs of people buried there. Sarah and Abraham, and Rachel and Yitzchak, and Rachel, Leah and Yaakov, Rivka and Yitzchak, etc. Okay, and also according to the Gemara, Adam and Chava. What? Not Rachel. I'm sorry. Right, Rachel. I'm sorry. All right. Good. Well said. Well said. It's early. Okay. Anyway, good point. The Marsha points out that, by the way, there is a problem just in terms of Pshat HaPsukim because it calls it Tzedei HaMachpelah. So Machpelah, according to the Pshat HaPsukim, seems to be referring more to the name of the place than actually the configuration of the cave, unless you say that the name of the field was named after the cave. Okay. Now, similarly, Kiryat Arba. What does Kiryat Arba mean? So, Amar of Yitzchak, Kiryat Ha'arba. What does Kiryat Ha'arba mean? Ha'arba Zugot, Adam, Chava, Avram, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka, Yaakov, Leah. There you see, it's in the Gemara. Okay, so that's what it means, Kiryat Arba, that there are four pairs that are there. Marsha says that it really seems like in Sefer Yoshua that Arba is the name of the person, but he says that the one place in Breshit it says Kiryat Ha'arba, which is, and Harba, you would not use the Hey Hayitiyah if it was a proper name. So that's really the Rasha of the Gemara. By Hebing me Amrafel, now back to Rav and Shmuel. It was in the days of Amrafel, so Melech Shinar, and the Medrash associates Amrafel with Nimrod. Because it says by Nimrod, Hashem, and the first major war we find in the Torah is with Amrafel. So there's an identification of Amrafel and Nimrod. So, now we're going to have a debate of Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel, Chadamar Nimrod Shmuel, his proper name was Nimrod, and Amrafel was more a descriptive name. Amrafel, Amar, Pal, right? Amarfel. Amar, Pio, Avram Abinu B'toch Tishan. So the famous midrash that Nimrod was, sort of gave Abraham an ultimatum. either to give up his monotheism or cast into the fire, and he was cast into the fire. That's Amar V'Hipio. So he was the one that did that. Amrafel Shemo. No, Amrafel is his proper name. Lamani Shemo Nimrod. So why was he called Nimrod? He needed Kololam Kulo Allah B'Malchuto. That he basically got everybody to rebel against God. And this is associating it with probably him as the head of the whole insurrection about Migdal Bavel, right? Because it's Melech Shinar, so it's the same location, and so on. So he was the mastermind, the leader behind that. Yes. I said that. I said that. I said it says, yeah, while you were getting your chumash, you weren't hearing that. But I pointed out that the Marsha already makes that point that it says Sedei HaMachpelah, so it's certainly a drash, right? Okay, so Vayakim Melech Hadash HaMitzrayim. Now, this a lot of these are famous because Rashi brings them down. Okay, so a new king arose over Egypt. Rav Shmuel Chadam Chadash Mamash, literally new. Chadam Shenit Chadesh K'zei Ratav. No, he changed his tune and he started making new edicts. Mandam Chadash Mamash Tichsiv Chadash. I mean, what do you mean? The Torah says new. Mandam Shenit Chadesh K'zei Ratav. I mean, the look Vayamat Vayimloch. Because it doesn't say that the previous king died. It says just a new king arose. But it says he didn't know Yosef. So obviously, if he was the same old guy, of course he knew Yosef. So no, he made it, he acted in ways which were as if he did not know who Yosef was. Okay, I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Said Rabbi Yochanan. Yochei Yamin Gidalti, Eitzel Rabbi Yoshaya. Now, this is going to seem like a digression, but it's going to circle back to the issue of Ma'abrin or Ma'avrin with an ayin or an aleph. Okay, Yudches Yamin Gidalti into Rabbi Yoshaya Rebbe. I learned for 18 days, not an enormous amount of time, but 18 days, and it's funny, by the way, the use of all right, so Gidalti, which means I grew up. Not I spent 18 years, or I spent 18 days. I grew up. You don't grow up. I don't know what that means exactly. It's a funny verb, but anyway, I learned with Rabbi Hoshaya. Now, Rabbi Hoshaya was roughly at the same period of Rebbe. He was, as we see here, a Rebbe of Rabbi Yochanan in the sort of the transition between the Tanaim and the Umarayim. He also, together with right, Rabbi Chia, thank you. He together with Rabbi Chia, I don't know what I was going to say. He together with Rabbi Chia were the sort of editors of the Tosefta. Right, so the Gemara says, any Bryce says the Lotani debate Rabbi Yosef debate Rabbi Chia, you can't trust the text because they were very, establishing the clear text of the Brightos and particularly of the Tosefta. So they sort of did parallel work with the Brightos that Rebbe did with the Mishnah. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan says, I spent 18 days by Rabbi Yoshaya, Berebbe. Berebbe is just an honorific. It means like an important person. Below, the great Rabbi Yoshaya, below, which is a pretty funny, like he says, I spent 18 days and I only learned from him one thing that about relating to the Mishnah. What was the one thing I learned from him? Ketzig me'avrin et ha'arim, the Aleph. Because he told me the Mishnah, the Avrin is with an Aleph. So it sounds like a pretty big put down, right? I only learned one thing from him, and the one thing I learned from him was pretty a trivial issue. It doesn't affect any Allah or anything. So you really wonder what the point of this was. I mean, but okay, let's see what the Gemara does with this. Right, I understand, but isn't it a little bit dismissing the importance of Rabbi Yoshaya? I spent 18 days and there's only one thing that he clarified for me. So that's what the Gemara is going to say. Maybe it only means one thing relating to the Mishnayot. Right, that could be. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara does with this. Now, that is consistent, by the way, with Rabbi Yoshaya's sort of enterprise of establishing the proper text of the Tanaitic material. So that's particularly, So let's see how the Gemara develops. Yes. Right, like footnotes. Okay. Anyway, so the question says, Amy, is this really true? V'amar Reb Yochanan Yudei Talmidim Hayilol Reb Yoshaya Rebbe. Reb Yochanan, same Reb Yochanan said that there were 18 students, maybe 18, 12. I don't know what I'm doing this morning. Anyway, 18 days, 12 students. There were 12 students, maybe 12 prize students that Rebbe Yoshaya had. Yudchet Yamim Gidalti Benem, and I spent 18 days among them. I understood the heart of each one of them. Rashi sort of says that means like their approach to learning, their methodology, their way of thinking, the chachmas kol echad v'echad, and the wisdom of every one of them. So Rashi says here wisdom sort of means their knowledge. Although chachma usually means more than just knowledge, but I understood their whole way of thinking and their particular derech and their insight and what they knew. So the Gemara says. So you see, he learned a lot of things during those 18 days. He learned all these different approaches, and he learned what everybody there knew. So the Gemara says no. Gemara says Leid kol echad ve'echad v'chachmas kol echad ve'echad gamar. So he learned their approaches, he learned their ways of thinking, but Gemara, well, Gemara, he didn't actually learn any new material. Okay, so anyway, if you think about it, I think learning a methodology is more important than learning material, right? What is it? Give me a fish, feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, feed me for life. But now the Gemara is starting to qualify. Fine, he learned their way of thinking, but he didn't learn any new material. He might say, or if you want, I could say, Minayu ditu Gamar. He learned from the students. He didn't learn anything new from Rabbi Yoshaya. Again, which is like, okay, that's pretty fascinating. The Ibai is saying more, and if you want, and here's really what it seems to be saying, what was suggested. He only learned one new thing about the Mishnah. Maybe he learned a lot of other things, but relating to the Mishnah, there was only one thing that Rabbi Yoshaya helped him clarify. Okay, so the Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Keshayinu lomdim Torah itza Rabbi Yoshaya. So Rabbi Yochanan also said when we were learning Torah by Rabbi Yoshaya, Hayinu Yoshim arba ba'ama. 4 of us would squeeze in to 1 amma. If you think about it, that's pretty tight fit. If an amma is like 1.5 feet, maybe it means an amma by an amma, but still, it's a very tight fit. Rashi says everybody was crowding around him to hear what he had to say. Of course, that means he had more than 12 students, because you have to crowd around and squeeze in that tight. So maybe it was 12. Maybe it was 12 prize students. But okay. I'm a Rabbi, and Rabbi said, when we were learning Torah by Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamua. So that's Tam Rebbe Lazar, the Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had 5 prize Talmidim, right? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, etc. One of them is Rabbi Lazar. So when we were learning Torah by Rabbi Lazar, we would squeeze 6 of us into 1 amma. Again, when the Marsha basically says it's either nace or exaggeration. All right, I'm Rabbi Yochanan. So continuing with this idea of speaking about, the sort of what it meant to be learning by these previous, Gedolim. So we continue with that theme, although it is funny because, again, so far what Rabbi Yochanan has said has not, sort of made us, been overly impressive, but the Gemara at least qualified it somewhat. Anyway, but now let's take a look. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yoshaya to Rabbi Bedora. Rabbi Yoshaya, the great one, right, in his generation, to Rabbi Meir Bedora, was as great as Rabbi Meir was in his generation, which was, a generation earlier. Ma Rabbi Meir Bedora, Yochlu Chaver Lavo Model Softato. If you remember, we had a lot of Agadata before, and Rabbi Meir was so brilliant, nobody could figure out what he was saying. Okay, nobody. So he might have come to brilliant conclusions, but nobody else could get there. After Rabbi Yoshaya, Lo Yochlu Chaver Lavo Model Softato. The same is true by Rabbi Yoshaya. So maybe that's what Rabbi Yochanan means, that Lo Lamadati. All I was able to learn from him was some textual correction, because maybe more of the analysis that was beyond my reach. So again, it is funny holding those two statements up side by side. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, and now we're going to actually get into a classic Gemara that compares earlier generations to later ones. Liban Shalishon Kipitcho Shel Ulam. The heart, meaning the understanding of the earlier generations, was like the opening of the ulam, right? The sort of the hall before the heichal, right? The kodesh, the kodesh. The later ones was like the opening of the heichal, and this goes back to the very first paragraph. If you remember, the ulam was 20 amos wide, and the heichal was only 10 amos wide. So this is reflecting this sort of theology, this approach of about Yeridas Hadoros. As the generations continue, their depth of understanding, gets more and more limited. Oh, because that's an interesting question. You know what? That's brilliant because there's always this issue. I mean, that's who was the first one that said? I think I don't think they know who the first one said about about the midgets standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Why is it that later generations can make advances that earlier ones cannot? And it's not because they were necessarily greater in wisdom or understanding, but they're like midgets standing on the shoulders of giants. The giants preceded them; they add a little bit so they can see further than the giants were able to see. So, maybe that's me. I didn't think about that, but maybe it's saying, we have less understanding, but we're building on what the previous generation did, so we're getting a little bit closer. I don't know if that's shot or not, but it's a beautiful thought. Okay, so now the Gemara says, okay, the Anu, but now it doesn't work with the third part of this. The Anu, Kamale Nekev Machat Sitkin. And our understanding is only like the opening of a very thin needle. So as opposed to 10 amos, our understanding is like that, our ability to see through and to get through the matter. Where the Gemara says, Rabbi, now who were these generations you're referring to? Rishonim, the early generations is Rabbi Akiva. Achronim is Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamua, which is Rabbi Eliezer, the student of Rabbi Akiva, the Rebbe of Rebbe, as we just heard a minute ago, and those are the generations. And then anyone after that, from Rebbe down, it's all it's all downhill from there. Some say Rishonim Rebbe Eliezer ben Shamua. No. Actually, the early generations, even by Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbe Akiva's Talmidim, they already had this broad understanding. Achronim, when did it start going downhill? That was Rebbe Oshaya, the Rebbe. But either way, then you get to my generation, because it's Rebbe Yochanan talking. But Anu, we, now the generation of the Amoraim as compared to the Tanaim, and it's a much greater drop-off, right? Because part of also what it might be referring to is that line between Tanaim and Amoraim, right? So the first one, sort of, the big drop-off happened after Rabbi Eliezer, which was sort of going to Rebbe. Rebbe wasn't fully transitional, but he was like the end of the period. The next version, the drop-off, is the line between the Tanaim and the Amoraim. So it might also be coming to explain, the built-in assumption of the Gemara is that, an Amora cannot argue on a Tana. You can explain a Tana, you can't argue. The only question is that transitional generation of Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, where the Gemara says, like, Rav Tanahu Pali. But basically, if you're clearly out of the Tanaim, you can't argue. Why not? Right? What's the big difference between, that generation and this generation? So some of it might be based on this assumption about this big drop-off in terms of, understanding and so on that's reflected here. So I should say something about this whole Yeridas Hadoros approach, which is here, and like I said, maybe even sort of specifically around the transition of Tanaim to Amoraim as an explanation of the difference. There's a lovely book out by Menachem Kellner called Maimonides and the Descent of Generations. Small little book, like 50 pages or something, 100 pages. Anyway, and what he basically shows is that this idea of Yeridas Hadoros, while certainly an approach that has its basis in Gemara, there's other Gemaras that say, like, in Mishonim Kimulachim, then, Anachim Kibnei Adam, in Mishonim Kibnei Adam, Anachim Kichamorim, not like the Chamor of Pinchas ben Yair, so makes these radical differences between how their greatness and how meager we are, and how lowly we are. So certainly there are Gemaras that say that, but there are other Gemaras that don't reflect that idea, and speak about, for example, I mean, just one idea, halacha kibasra, you go by later generations, it reflects the idea now might be sort of like the midgets on the shoulders of giants, and it reflects the fact that they're building on previous generations and they have the ability to see previous generations. Because particularly in Rambam you see in a lot of places, the Rambam understood that, understanding in science advances, that later generations understand better in terms of science, in terms of medicine, in terms of, astronomy, all these types of issues. So he basically, says that this issue, first of all, it's not like it's Tar Moshe Sinai, this idea of Yeridas Hadoros. And number two, it's a question about its use in terms of explaining the authority of Chazal. How much do we believe that the authority of Chazal rests upon the idea that they were smarter than us? They knew everything and we don't know anything, right? For some people, that's very important. And because of that, you can't suggest that they ever made a mistake, because that undermines that sense of their authority. Because the only reason they're authoritative is they knew everything and we know nothing. But he says, but according to Rambam, the authority of the Gemara is not based on the fact that they knew better than us. It's based on the fact that it was canonized, that it was accepted by Klal Yisrael. And that's why the Bavli is more authoritative than the Yerushalmi, not because the Bavli knew better, but it was Bavli what was canonized, and the Yerushalmi wasn't. And the Kesef Mishnah says the same thing is true about this issue of Amoraim not arguing on Tanayim. or Rishonim not arguing on Amoraim, right? Where's that from? He says it's not all it's from is from an implicit sort of consensus canonization of the later generation. Basically, the Mishnah came out, and everybody after the Mishnah implicitly accepted the authority of the Mishnah, and canonized the Mishnah, or canonized the Tanaitic material. And therefore, it was through that act of canonization, through the people essentially, that was invested with the weight and the authority that it has. So that's a very different approach to the nature of rabbinic authority. It does not demand insisting that, they knew everything and we know nothing. So the issues around here are really very deep in terms of a general, question about rabbinic authority and attitude towards Chazal and all those types of issues. You have to believe, that they can't make any mistakes and we know nothing and so on. Yes. Right, exactly. It continues on. And why does the Shulchan Aruch become largely authoritative? What? It's like, did Moshe come down the Sinai with the Shulchan Aruch? So again, according to the canonization approach, it's because, over time, it didn't happen immediately, but more and more, it became the sefer that people referred to for various reasons, which I could, A, that it was very well organized and short and to the point. B, that when Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote it, he says explicitly he's not just writing his own personal opinion, he's trying to present a consensus opinion, so that gave it greater weight because it was presented as a consensus opinion. Anyway, so over time, people kept on using it, and the more and more you refer to it and use it, the more it becomes somewhat canonical, right? Like nowadays, tell somebody that it's possible to poskin against the Mishnah Brura. They'll think they're an apikaris, But whoever said the Mishnah Brura was authoritative, it's because since once things become very accessible and usable and everybody refers to it, that is a way of it becoming invested with authority. Those that adopt the other approach, that the authority comes from the fact that true, and the people and whatever, and the Chazal knew everything and we know nothing. So why is the Shulchan Aruch authoritative? So actually, some Achronim say that they do use the reality of sort of historical canonization, but in an indirect way. They say, let's see if you can finish the sentence. The fact that the Shulchan Aruch has been accepted by Klal Yisrael is a proof that what? It's Ratzon Hashem, it's Yaita Dishmaya, that God would not have allowed it to be accepted by Klal Yisrael if it did not embody the true halacha, the true halacha. So there are these very two different approaches to where you see halachic authority coming from. Anyway, so that is, I think, particularly here also he speaks about the drop off between Tanaim and Amoraim. Yes. What was? I'm sorry, the Meiri. Right, absolutely. Absolutely. The Chazon Ish was very much of this canonization approach. And the Chazon Ish said that the Rishonim that are discovered that were not part of the Masorah of Klal Yisrael have no halachic weight. Not because he didn't think that they might not have been smarter, they might not have had a better shot in the Gemara, but what gives things halachic weight is their acceptance within to the halachic system. Now the question becomes if that's an evolving reality, right? The same way the Mishnah Brura, the Shulchan Aruch became accepted, the Mishnah Brura did, when more and more people start referencing the Meiri or referencing whatever they're referencing, and it becomes more and more used by poskim, then it can start to be given that way. But yes, that exact idea, the Chazon Ish very much was, of that approach. Also questions how you deal with manuscript error, and all these types of questions. Right. Yes, right. So there's a lot of importance to the theological issues that underpins all of this. Right. Okay, so let's continue. So Gemara says like this. Okay, where are we? So we get to the who we're referring to. Amar Abaye, the Anan. So that was Rabbi Yochanan talking. Rabbi Yochanan was at least the generation that after the first generation of Amoraim. We Abaye towards the end of the Amoraim. He sichsa beguda the Gemara. We are like trying to get a peg to go into a stone wall when it comes to Gemara. When it comes to now, Gemara here might mean Gemara is sort of tradition in the sense of like because part of the question is there's always two issues in the Gemara. One is the passing down of the information, especially in an oral culture. So it's learning everything that you had, learning the Masorah. The other is using your Svara. So Abaye is particularly saying, it's like, look, everything else, even the needle, the hole went all the way through. right? It might be less. Here you're trying to push a peg into a wall and you still don't get it to go through. Maybe you get it to go in a little bit, like a nail into a wall, but it's not going all the way through. But he says Gemara. Now, obviously, the further the generations are removed, maybe there is like less of a clear chain of transmission, and some of the material is lost. Amar Rava. Now, Rava says the anan ki etzbasa bikira l'svara. Now, this is something that's different because this is not just the passing on of information, but it's the analytical ability. We are like a finger in wax when it comes to svara. Well, if you put a finger in like dried wax, it doesn't work. Or maybe if you put it in soft wax, but then you remove it, and again, it doesn't go too far, or it sort of closes up, depending on how soft or liquefied the wax is. I was sort of wondering, although I think it's obviously a misread, if Rava, maybe you could use Rava's metaphor to be something of the opposite. Like Svara, we might not be as bad, right? Maybe the line of tradition, and so some information is lost. But if you put a finger in wax, it'll actually stay and make an impression. So I don't know, but it does still. Yeah, or some of it sticks, you get some of it. But still, it seems like Rabbi was the peg in the wall. It's not going all the way through. Yes. Way afterward. Yovenim was first generation of Orion, and Rabbi and Rebbe were close to the end of the Amar. Right. Okay, so now Gemara says, okay, Amar Ravashi, Anan, so Ravashi says, Anan, etzbasa bebira l'sichcha. So we are like putting your finger into a well when it comes to forgetting, meaning there's absolutely no resistance to us to forget. We just in one ear, out the other. So again, a lot of this has to do with, retaining information. And of course, as the Torah Shabbat Peh increases, there's more information to retain, right? Right? You know the joke about the kid, whatever, he's trying to study and memorize all the presidents. And his mom said, when I was your age, I knew, all the presidents backwards. I said, well, yeah, there were only 2 or 3 then. So anyway, okay, but anyway, but it's so a lot of this Gemara and Sikha have to do with retaining information. It does raise interesting questions in terms of analysis and insight. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. So said Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Bnei Yehuda Shekpidu. Now we're going to sort of circle back. That whole discussion was because of the one thing Rabbi Yochanan learned from Rabbi Yoshai, at least as far as Mishnah was concerned, was Ma'abrin with an Aleph. Now we're going to have another story that gets us back to Ma'abrin or Ma'afrin. Let's take a look. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Bnei Yehuda Shekpidu al Shonam, the Bnei Yehuda, the people of Judea, as opposed to Galilee, right, which is how Eretz Yisrael was divided at that time. They were very careful, precise with their language. So their Torah was established. They held on to their Torah. Bnei Galio, Bnei Galio that maybe spoke loosely, did not speak as refined. Their Torah was not as established. So the Gemara says, Midi, but so I don't understand. What does knowing your Torah, remembering your Torah, have to do with how careful you are with your language? So the Gemara spells it out. Ella, here's what it means. Bnei Yehuda Didaiki Lishna. Bnei Yehuda are very exact in the language, meaning if they learn a text, a Mishnah, right, and again, it's all an oral culture, so that's key, is how do you hold on to the information. So they are very precise, they establish a precise text, and and therefore they're able to have like mnemonics in order to remember, because you have an exact text and you have a way of remembering. There, they're able, therefore, they remember it very well. Bnei Galil Bnei Galil that is not so careful about getting down the exact text. So if you don't have an exact text, everything is sort of a moving target, number one, and therefore it's very hard to make certain mnemonics because you're not being so precise to remember. It did not get established. By the way, what Rashi also says is that it's not just establishing each Mishnah, but if you have a particular order and you're very careful about the order of which Mishnah follows the other, you can make a mnemonic to remind you, about the order of what the next one is. Whereas if you're more disorganized, then you sort of lose you lose the whole thread. Yes. Yeah, I don't know what to say to that. Okay, maybe when he got his memorizers to be from Bnei Yehuda, not from Bnei Galil. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to move on. Bnei Galil. So where are we? Okay. Bnei Yehuda Gamru Michad Rabba. Again, notice the word Gemara, which is learning and learning a text. right? Which is very much like the earlier discussion. They learned from only one teacher, these kind of Torah and Biyadim. So they held on to their Torah. And they go to the Logam Michad Rabbi, they learned from all different teachers. These kind of Torah and Biyadim, they did not hold on to it. Now again, if Tosos makes this point that this is about the information. If you look at Tosos, the Gamer Michad Rabba, the Gemara, for like the learning of Gemara here means again of like material, the passing on of material, Rav Chad Adif. That you get one particular version of the Mishnah. You don't get every person you ask gives you a different version of the Mishnah. You get one particular girsa and you learn it. About the mitzvah, but in terms of analysis, right? So in order to get different ways of analyzing methodology, thinking about things, you want to expose yourself to a lot of different approaches and a lot of different ways of thinking. But in order to learn the text, you got to start with one text, and then you can work off of that. Chaim Soloveitchik once made the interesting point about how Tosfos was not possible until there was a Rashi. Not because the Tosfos couldn't explain the Gemara, but what Rashi did is he established a default, a fixed meaning of the Gemara. So, until then it was like a moving target. How do you criticize, how do you ask a critical question about the Gemara if you don't even, if you're not even sure what, if you have three possibilities what this line means. So it's, how do you start doing analysis? So once you give a standard explanation, you've made it like a fixed target, then you can do your analysis, and as a result of your analysis, you could say, really, the answer is we have to give a different explanation to the Gemara. Okay, but as long as there are multiple possibilities, you really can't get to the next stage. So this is also what it's saying. You start with one text. Start with a clear, single version of a text from one Rebbe, then you can do your analysis. And then the analysis, you're actually better if you expose yourself to more approaches. Yes. That's exactly why learning Yerushalmi is difficult. How do you start asking questions if you're like it's like walking on a quicksand, because you know that any question you ask, well, maybe I didn't understand this right. Three possibilities what this could mean, right? So yes, so that's exactly this of first establishing a text, even if there's other texts out there, other versions out there. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Ravina Amar, B'nai Yehuda the Galu Mesichta, B'nai Yehuda that exposed a Mesechet, which, what does that mean? Rashi says it means that they taught it to other people, or they, or some say it means, or Rashi just says that, that they go in depth, they reveal it by sort of analyzing what they've learned. But some say it means they use it to paskin to other people. Okay, but anyway, so a couple versions. They that were revealed in Masechet, Niskaimet Torah and Biyadim, it was established. Now, I should say, the explanation of Rashi that Golu Masechta means, got into it and analyzed it, would be a nice counterpart to the point before. Before the point was, what makes you remember it is very focused on learning the material. Be very precise to the language, learn from one source, and so on. Now it's saying part of what makes you remember is if you get into it and analyze it and think about it, that also makes you remember it. It's not just about memorization. Memorization is tied into understanding. David Gali Masechta, David revealed the Masechet, again, whatever that means. Sholo Gali Masechta. David the Gali Masechta Ksiv Bey. So by David it says, those who fear you will see me and rejoice, because they know that if they're asking me like a halacha or a psak or whatever, they're very happy because I know what I'm talking about. Okay, and this ties into all those midrashim, particularly in brachos, with David, sitting and getting his hands bloody with dealing with issues of miscarriage and going to Mephibosheth. So everybody's very happy with him as a posek. The local Masechta Ksiv Bey, Kol Asher Yifneh Yarshiyah. Wherever he would turn, he would do evil. So here it's not saying like literally evil, like he was a bad person, but it means that he would cause bad things to happen because presumably he would pass it incorrectly. And not to end with such a negative statement about Shaul, actually already this is, I think, toning down the simple sense of the pasuk, because now his whole evil is just that he didn't have a good enough understanding and paskin poorly, which one thing is saying how bad that is, but on the other thing it's a little bit, I think, softening the judgment of Shaul. So consistent with that, it says, how do you know God forgave Shaul for that sin? That sin meaning the big sin, wiping out, no fear Kohanim. Because the pasuk says, that Shaul says to that Shmuel says to Shaul, right, when he was raised from the dead. Tomorrow you and your son will be with me. They're going to die in battle, right? People remember that story. So imi means with me. You'll be in my mechitza, meaning you'll be in my chamber. So up in Shemayim. So basically, you'll get olam haba. You'll be right there with me. In my olam haba. Okay, so that was a little bit of a digression. Anyway, the point being, so we have the difference between Yehuda and Galil. We still don't know why it's relevant. So now we're going to find out why it's relevant. Rabbi Abba said, Rabbi Abba, if there's somebody here that can ask the Bnei Yehuda, people from Judea, because they're very precise with their language, so you should ask them, Ma'abrin Snan or Ma'abrin Snan? Is it with an aleph or is it with an ayin? Because they know what they're talking about. Achuzut Snan? Oh, by the way, I also think, well, let me show you the other one. Achuzutnan or achuzutnan. There's a Mishnah about mumin by a bechor, and it speaks about like you might be missing a testicle and how you test for it, and speaks about the animal sitting on its haunches, on its rear end. So buttocks. So that's either achuzu with an aleph or achuzu with an ayin. So yadi, they'll know it. So you should ask them. If somebody who can ask them, you should ask them because they'll know it. Now here, by the way, if memory serves correctly, which it hasn't been so far this morning, but okay, if memory serves correctly, Yehuda was more, Galileo was more cosmopolitan, more cities, more influenced, I think, by Hellenism and so on, whereas Yehuda was more rural. Is that correct, Charlie? I saw you nodding. So going back to the point I said before, in Galileo, they were not Dayak Lishne because the whole guttural issues were being lost and being confused, like the guttural ayins and so on. And you notice that both of these questions were an aleph or an ayin question. So it said, ask B'nai Yehuda. They all know the difference between an aleph and an ayin. So what? Ask a Taimani, exactly. So that was the point. I think that is part of this issue of Dayak Lishne, that their language remained more precise, and when it was becoming an amalgam, of pronunciations up in Galileo. So ask them. So the Gemara says, Shelinu. So they asked him. The army lay, and they said back to whoever asked, Ikadatani Ma'avrin, Ikadatani Ma'avrin. They're two different words. Ikadatani Yachuzu, Ikadatani Yachuzu. Okay, fine. Now, what's an example of the Dayak Lishne? So I've been talking about the Ayin Aleph. The Gemara is going to give another example. Tehu bar Yehuda, the Amarlu. There was a certain person from Judea that was saying to people, Talis Yechli Limkor. I have a talis to sell. Amarle, my Gavan Talitecha, what color is it? Amalahu, Kitardin Ale Adama. Like beets, the leaves of beets that grow from the ground. So it's a particular shade of green, not the beets themselves, the leaves. Now, what is the point that, look how precise he was. So, because he gave you a very precise view. But the Marsha says a better point. The Marsha says, because normally, how would you say green in Hebrew? Yarok. The problem is, if you look in the Mishnah, Yarok sometimes means green and sometimes means yellow. It's like a green-yellow continuum. So he says he didn't want to say yellow because you wouldn't know if he meant green or yellow. So he says, like the leaves of this beet. Okay, he was very careful. B'nai Galil, the low Dayak Lishne Mai, he have up B'nai Galil, Tu Bar Galila, Davika Azil, there was a person from Galilee that was going, Amalu, and saying to people, Amar Laman, who has Amar, who has Amar? Now, the Marshaki says the Gersh says Amar Laman, because you'll see the Gemara comes up with four possibilities about what this means. Amrule, so they said to him, Glila Shota, stupid Galilean, what are you asking for? Chamar Lemirkov? Are you asking about a chamor, a donkey to ride on? Oh, chamar, let me say, are you asking for wine to drink? So that's the first Amar, which is why the Marsha says the first Amar was actually chamar. Okay? Now the second one, what are you asking about? Amar, Lemyovash, are you asking about wool to get dressed with? Oh, Imar, Liiskas, are you asking for an Imar, a sheep to shech? What are you asking? Now, by the way, notice all of this is about Aleph, Ayin, and Chet. So that whole idea that this is a question about the guttural letters could, very well plays out here. So, Hahu Itata, now another story. There was a woman, this is just talking about people that speak in a sloppy way, and again, might be referring to Galileans, which have more of an amalgam in terms of what's happening to their language. So she wanted to say to her friend, come, let me feed you milk. Amalek, he said, shaluchti, which is a mispronunciation of like my friend, my neighbor, which the actual correct word is, Rashi says, where is it? He wanted to say shaluvati, which is a way of saying my, like, my friend. So, and she said shaluchti, so already she's making a mistake. And then she said, where am I? Wait a minute. Tochlich Lavi. So she wanted to say Tochlich Chelba, and she said Tochlich Lavi, which means a lion. Okay. What? Exactly. Okay. Also notice, yeah, again, I would still, right, point out this whole chet issue is going on. He eats it the Asila Kami de Dayana. So a certain woman came in front of a judge. Amrle, he said to him, Mari Kiri, so she said, Mr. Slave, because she wanted to say Kiri with a kuf, which is a way of referring to like an honorific, like, master. But she said Kiri with a chaf, which is slave. Tifla Havasli. I had, she wanted to say tavla, like a tableau, but she said tifla, which is like a beam I had. The Ganufcha min. And she wanted to say it was stolen from me, but she said, but she said they stole. But Ganufcha min means that they stole you, the judge. Okay, Kadu Havas, and this was how it was. Okay, Kadu means now, but he really wanted to say the Chadan. It was like this. This is how it was. The Kadshadu L'cha Iluya. If they were to stretch you on this tableau, well, Mati Karayacha Ara. Your legs wouldn't reach the ground. Now, the last part was not a mispronunciation; it was just being like very rude and inappropriate, sort of giving an image of a judge being stretched out on a tableau. Okay, but clearly she is having all these like mispronunciations. I'm hasa to be Rabbi. Now we have more positive versions about good use of language, and the female servant or slave of Rabbi. When she wanted to talk in a wise way, we'll see what it means. Sort of means like not be sort of vulgar, be sort of subtle. Amra, she said, Amra, she said this. Aleph nakvis bechad, what's it called? The ladle, I guess, whatever, went into, banged into the barrel. Meaning the ladle that you use to draw out the wine from the barrel, it's banging at the bottom of the barrel, meaning there's no wine left. Yadun yishra l'kinehon, let the eagles fly to their nest. Meaning there's no wine left. It's time for all the talmidim to go home. Okay, so but what is a maid doing, telling me it's time to go home? So therefore, she spoke in a more, roundabout and respectful way, in a more metaphorical way. The Chachamim by the late spoon. Now, when he wanted the students to, or the visitors to stay, have it amra, he would say amaluhu yadi basar chaverta mina. Let it be removed from its friend, which means the plug of the wine barrel should be removed from the barrel. V'tiskifi alas bekad, and let the ladle float in the barrel. There's so much wine it'll float on the top. Ki'il for the azlab yama, like a ship that sails in the sea. Okay, so again, it's just a nice way of talking that says that sort of is inviting everybody to stay. Even though it wasn't like her place to invite people, but so therefore she spoke about it, and she alluded to it in this way. It's polite, it's a polite language. Rabbi Yossi Bar Afyan, now Rabbi Yossi Bar Afyan, when he wanted to speak in this sort of wise way, in a language of, sort of this, more indirect way, Amar, he said like this, Asuli shor b'mishpat, make for me an ox in judgment, Betor Miskain in a unfortunate mountain. Now, what the heck does that mean? So this is more like a riddle, okay? And Shur B'Mishpat, if you translate that to Aramaic, Tardin is beats, okay? Betor Miskain in a poor mountain, so it's Har Dal, which is chardal. So I would like some beets with mustard. Okay, now we're getting into riddles. Okay, but Kadhavi Shpiza, when he wanted to know about an innkeeper, Amar Haki, he would say this: Gvar tum din chai. This, this man's mouth, the man mouths judgment live. What does that mean? So Gvar is ish, Pum is peh, Ush peh, right? Din is zeh, and Chai is nas. So Ush bezichna. So, or Rashi, so that's how, so anyway, little riddle. Okay. Um, okay. The other one says, Mazo Tova Yesh. So, what, what good does he have? Meaning, how, what's his welfare? How's he doing? Rabbi Avo Kiavi Mishai de Lashon Chachma. When Rabbi Avo wanted to speak in this more riddle language, Chavi Amar Hachi would say this: Asrigu l'tachamim, turn the coals into esrogs, which basically means make them like yellow, or Rashi says red. I don't know too many red esrogs, but anyway, fire up the coals. Arkiel is a havim. Spread out the gold because now they're yellowish or reddish yellow. So make spread out the coals. And make for me two speakers in the night. Who are speakers in the night? So they're like the roosters that crow, whatever as the night is ending. Either the Amri, some say Vyasuli behen shnei megidei ba'alat. I don't really understand the big difference between those. Make me with them. Okay, Amrulei Rabbanan l'Rebbe Avahu. So now another little play on words we're going to get to. The rabbi said to Rebbe Avahu, Hatspinenu, show us, right? So says to look. Heichan Rebbe Eli Tzafun. So again, the play Hatspinenu Tzafun. Where is he hiding? Okay, so they were looking for Rebbe Eli, but they were sort of having fun with the way they were talking, doing little word games. Somebody once said that, this is what they did before they had TV. Okay, so he said to them, Alat bin Ara, he rejoiced in a young woman, Aharonit, an Aharonic woman from Aharon, Aharonit, last, Iranit, like wise or lively, v'hinirato, and it kept him awake. So obviously, there's a play here, aharonit, ivanit, v'hinirato. So what does this mean? Amri Isha, which would seem a little crude, okay, that it meant that he was spending time at night with his wife and he stayed up pretty late. So what's Aharonit? So Rashi says that, she's a Bas Kohen, Aharonit, a last wife, maybe, it's a second wife, Iranit, and she was very pretty or lively, and he stayed up late at night being with his wife. And some say it was more of a metaphor. It doesn't literally mean his wife. It means and that's a whole other metaphor that goes on about like Torah as the other woman. And this whole sort of type of romantic, even sexual relationship, and so on. So he spent last night studying, learning all night. He was very involved in a lively masechta. Okay, so where were we? I don't think so. I think this is. I think this is Rabbi Eli the Amora. I don't know. Pretty sure this is an Amora. Okay. So now the Gemara said, "Amilei Rabbi Eli." Right. You'll see right now. It's the same Rabbi Eli. Now they asked Rabbi Eli, "Hatzbinenu heichan Rabbi Avod tzachun." Tell us where's Rabbi Avod hidden. Okay. So meaning. First he asked Rabbi Avo, where's Rabbi Eli? Then he asked Rabbi Eli, where's Rabbi Avo? So obviously they were playing some type of a game. Okay, so like give us a little riddle, essentially what it was. Okay, so here's what he said back to them. Amar lehen nisya'et maktir. He took counsel from the one who gives the crown, meaning the nasi. So it means that he was given smicha because he was given authority to paskin. And he went south to Mephibosheth, meaning he went to Eretz Yisrael to learn Torah, because Mephibosheth, is sort of held up as the Rebbe of David. So I have to tell you, this answer was not as clever as the previous one. Okay, so Rebbe Eli knew how to play the game better. Okay, anyway, Rebbe Avo knew how to play it. Anyway, Amar Rebbe Yoshua ben Hanania. It's very famous little medrash. Nobody ever sort of beat me, bested me, and maybe particularly in a language issue, but we'll see, except for a woman, a young boy, and a young girl. Doesn't literally mean an infant. What was the story with the woman? Once I, spent time by a certain innkeeper, a woman, Astali Pulin, she made for me like lentils on the first day. I ate them. I completely finished them. They were delicious. Shnia, it's the second day, same thing. I cleaned my plate. Yom Shlishi, on the third day, she added too much salt to it, and it was spoiled. Even Amti, when I tasted it, I left it aside. I didn't eat it. She said to me, Rabbi, why are you not eating? Amarti look, I ate something already before. Amrali, she said to me, if you really weren't that hungry, then you shouldn't have had the bread, and you should have filled yourself up with, the main meal. So it doesn't. That's not a good explanation. If you really weren't hungry, you wouldn't have eaten the bread. You would have saved your appetite for the beans. So Amrali, so she said, I'm going to tell you what it is. I know you're not eating it. This is in the subtext because I added too much salt. But let me tell you why I did that. I wanted to make a point. Amrali, Rabbi, Shema lo hinachta. I mean, obviously, he's talking very respectfully. Peah barishonim. Maybe you didn't leave over peah, right? A corner. You didn't leave a little food over because you wiped your plate clean. Apparently, they had a minhag. It's very interesting. They call it peah. It's the use of these biblical agricultural things in contemporary scenarios, like the idea of mice or suffix. So here they had an idea of peah. You don't clean off your whole plate. You leave a little over. And Rashi says so that the servant who's cleaning the plates can eat from what was left over. Okay, so same idea, like leaving over for the poor. What? Right. Yeah, so maybe you didn't leave over payah b'rishonim. But haven't the sages said, you don't leave over it in the pot when you serve from the pots to the plates. You leave it over on the plate. So I basically wanted to, so she did this essentially to make him aware that he shouldn't have been eating everything all up. Okay, Tinokes Magi, what's the story about the young girl? She taught him a halacha, she taught him a lesson. At least in sort of basic derech eretz. Pam achas hayisi mahalik b'derech, I was going on the way, vayisa derech overes b'sadeh. And there was a path going through a field. Vayisi mahalik and I would walk on it. Amali tinokas achlas, so a certain young girl said to me, Rebbe, no sadizo, isn't this a field? The field is a place where, as opposed to a bika valley, where you plant things. What are you doing walking through somebody's field? Amarkilo, and I said to her, Amarkilo, what do you mean? There's a path here. Amali, she said back to me, Listim kamotcha kafshua. Yeah, robbers like you turned it into a path, right? Because everybody thinks they can walk on it, they made it into a path. I got to tell you, this is so true. Right now, if you think about the shortcut here to the show, right, it's because people were walking through and made it a path, so now they laid a sidewalk there, but actually it's a process, and when you're participating in it, you could still be, going where you should not be going, and everybody thinks it's okay because somebody else did it. Okay, the last one is, Tinok Mahi, a young boy, what's the story? I saw a young boy sitting by a crossroads, and we know what Yogi Berra says. When you come to a crossroads, take it. Okay, but I said to him, actually, fork in the road. Anyway, which way do I get to the city? Amrali, he said to me, this one is short and long, and this one is Arucha V'Ktsara, long and short. So halachti b'ktsara baruch. I went to the one he said was short and long. Kivan shigati l'ir. I got to the city. Matzati shemakifino so ganus pardesim. It was yes, it got me right to the outside of the city, but there were all these gardens and orchards. So it took me forever to get around all of that into the city. Chazarti machorai. I turned around and I went back to him. Amartilo and I said, "B'ni, hello, Amartili ktsara. You told me it was short." I'm a leaf. But I told you it was a short one that in the end will prove to be long. Nashakti Rosho, I kissed him on his head. I'm a Markilo. Ashreichem Yisrael, praise are you Israel. Shakuchem Chachamim Gedolim Atem Migdochem Ad Ktanchem. And men and women. Okay, very nice. And the whole idea of Arucha Shiktsara, Ktsarki Arucha is a nice metaphor that's used elsewhere. All right.